It is noon Eastern. We have a lot to cover today, so we're going to jump right on in. We'll have some people join us, I'm sure, throughout the hour. But again, my name is David Dodge. I'm the executive editor of Gays with Kids. I use he and him pronouns. And today you're joining our webinar on pursuing surrogacy in the US for international intended parents. So we have a lot to cover today, but actually before I get into today's topics, I'd like to just give a little bit of a background on who Gays with Kids is, and in case this is your first time interacting with us. So we got started about 7 years ago, and we started mostly just as a place to help inspire gay, bi, and trans men to overcome the many barriers that are often put in our place to become dads. So we started an Instagram page, which became very popular, displaying images of gay fatherhood, and started writing stories about basically any gay, bi, or trans dad that we could find to kind of show people how they navigated the complicated processes of fatherhood available to us, namely adoption, foster care, surrogacy, parenting arrangements. And so, it turns out we did a really good job inspiring people, because over the last 7 years or so, people have started to come to us and say, that's great, I want to be a dad, but how do I do that? It's one thing to read about someone else doing it. It's a very another thing to be able to understand the process of these very complicated processes, start to finish. And so, the truth was at the time, we didn't really have the expertise we needed in order to show our audience how to, from the minute you get like the idea of fatherhood in the head, down to like what adoption agency you're going to go with, what fertility clinic, what depending on the route you're taking. So we spent the last year and a half really scouring the country, looking for partners that we could work with to bring you content that really does, again, walk you through step by step the whole way of these, like, again, very complicated processes, which you know that they're complicated or you wouldn't be on a webinar learning how to do these things. So I'm very excited that we have the experts that we have. Again, we were looking for people that you'll find when you start looking for partners that there are no shortage of them in these worlds of adoption and surrogacy, IVF. But they're, the number that have been around and doing this for a very long time and have very long track records of success are much smaller, and even smaller still are organizations that are very committed to the LGBTQ community, not just friendly, but are like actually passionate about the idea of helping queer people become parents. So we're very excited about the partners that we're working with. You'll meet several of them later today in this webinar. And I will also say, if this is your first webinar with us, we have a whole bunch of different webinar series that you can log on to learn about other aspects of this. We're going to be brushing over a lot of very complicated things in today's webinar, such as the surrogacy process, what IVF is. And again, we have webinars dedicated to these and many other things about the costs of surrogacy, et cetera. So please do go check out, after this webinar, our other webinars online, gayswithkids.com, or on our YouTube page. They're all listed there. But so again, today's webinar is very specific to people living outside of the United States that are interested in pursuing surrogacy here locally. And so it is a little bit different than the process than for people that are living in the US. But so some of it's the same, and that includes some of your team members. So we're going to go through who these people are that are going to help get you to the finish line, start to finish, and what their responsibilities are. And again, several of the people you'll meet today are members of that potential team. We're also going to cover why the US is such a popular place to do surrogacy, and in many ways one of the only really safe bets for surrogacy. It's an old industry here comparatively to anywhere else in the world, really. And there are options that are outside of the US. Again, Gays with Kids, we're very neutral, but we want to help you get to fatherhood however or whatever way you want to. But there really are some very important considerations when doing this internationally. And you'll learn about why the US has some of the best regulations and experience in the world. And then this is, again, specific to people that are living outside of the US and having children here. There's some obvious legal implications that are going to be specific to your journey that aren't going to necessarily impact those doing it here. So we're going to spend a good chunk of the time really going over those legal considerations so you have a good understanding of what you're getting yourself into. And then, so you'll hear us yak at you for about 30, 35 minutes, but we will spend a good 20, 25 minutes at the end of this for Q&A, where you can ask all of the questions that you have. We will get through as many as we can. You'll hear me repeat this email several times. We unfortunately don't always get through all the questions, and there's some very good ones that we would love to be able to answer. We will get back to you if you email us at dads@gayswithkids.com at any time. We'll make sure that we get the response that you need from our team of experts. But even more excitingly, we've just recently worked with all of our partners to be able to offer each of you a 30-minute free consultation with any or all of the experts that you see here today. And so that's really going to be your best opportunity to get your specific question answered. And we'll be dropping those into the chat link towards the end of this. You'll get that in an email as well. Okay, so that's enough of hearing me talk. So today you're going to be hearing from Victoria Ferrara, who's the founder and legal director of Worldwide Surrogacy Specialists, Dr. Juan Alvarez, who's a reproductive endocrinologist at the Fertility Centers of Illinois, and Richard Vaughn, who's the founder of International Fertility Law Group. So they're going to take us through the next about 30 minutes of presentation, and then again we'll spend the last 20 or 30 minutes on Q&A. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Vicki.
Thank you, David. So great to be here with you and with Attorney Vaughn and with Dr. Alvarez. Pleased to be part of Gays with Kids. It's a really prominent and well-known resource to learn how to have your family, your children, through gestational surrogacy and other means. So again, I'm Vicki Ferrara. I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for over 30 years. I'm gay. I have a partner and we have 2 children. And that's really how I got into surrogacy. About 15 years ago, people started to ask me if I could help them find a surrogate. And I started that informally and then made it into the agency now known as Worldwide Surrogacy. And pleased to say that we have a full team of people and we've been helping many parents to become parents through gestational surrogacy here in the United States. We call ourselves Worldwide Surrogacy because we have parents from all over the world, but all of the births happen here in the US. So this slide is a very broad overview of what you need to know from start to finish. And each one of these bullet points, if you will, has a great deal of detail and in-depth considerations. But first of all, and the most important thing is number 1, that you have to find competent surrogacy professionals. And that's why you're here. You're learning who the people are in the world of surrogacy here in the US, and you're going to take next steps and have personal consultations with some of us and others. And that is how you're going to eventually choose your professional team. And it's a complicated process to have a surrogacy journey here in the United States. So again, it's really important to start out with the right professional team. Your team will be your medical clinic, your physician, who will help you and guide you to make your embryos, your surrogacy agency that will be there for foundational support throughout the entire process, and your lawyers who will be assisting you with law here in the US to establish your parentage, to establish your contracts, and to establish your citizenship for your baby in your home country. And so those are the buckets, the groups of professionals that you need to be thinking about. Once you know who your team is, and you're going to be getting into the details of the process. So of course, you need to decide who will be contributing the sperm to make the embryos. If you're a single man, obviously it's you. If you're in a couple, it could be both of you or one of you. You will need an egg donor, and there are wonderful resources here in the US to obtain egg donors. Here at Worldwide Surrogacy, we focus on surrogates. So we don't have an egg donor database, but many of our parents actually locate their egg donors through their medical clinics. The surrogacy IVF clinics usually have egg donation programs, so it's a good place to start. And if you don't find your egg donor there are egg donation agencies that we coordinate with. So really all you need to do is choose your egg donor, and your professional team will jump in and make all the connections happen and get your egg donor to your clinic and all of that. So even though it may require another agency to find the egg donor, it's simple enough for the intended parents just to choose the egg donor, and then the teams get going to make all the medical processes happen. One of the obviously most important things you'll do is match with a surrogate. That's going to be the work of your surrogacy agency. So very importantly, any surrogacy agency that you're looking at should be telling you about the screening that they do of their surrogate applicants. It should be very rigorous. It should be very detailed. It should include psychological evaluation, background investigation, home visits or home checks, gathering of medical records to have your IVF physician review them, social work interview. You should have so much information about this woman that you really don't have any questions about whether or not she would be a sound, stable, wonderful person to carry a baby. I often think about my international parents and how daunting it must be to be you maybe across the ocean or on another continent and thinking about someone carrying your baby here. And that's where the screening comes in of the surrogates, because they really are people who care about what they're doing. And that's where your surrogacy team and professionals come in to keep things stable and secure for you here in the US. Once you're matched with a surrogate, that process can take time. It varies with agencies. It's going to be anywhere from like 4 months to 15 or 18 months. And that's something that you ask the agency, how long will it take me to match with a surrogate? And then there's a period of time, the second phase after you're matched, between the match and the embryo transfer, it's approximately 3 months. By then, you'll most likely have your embryos made, and your surrogate will visit your medical clinic and begin the process to prepare herself physically for the embryo transfer. And then hopefully we have a pregnancy. And that's our bullet point 6 here, where you're going to have an ongoing relationship with your surrogate, and you're going to be in close contact with her, and your team is going to know everything that's going on and be making sure that the communication is going well between you and your surrogate, and that she's doing everything she's supposed to do in terms of going for medical appointments. And then most importantly, besides the health of the pregnancy, during the pregnancy, is to establish you as the legal parent or parents of your baby. And that's the beautiful thing legally about gestational surrogacy, is you become the legal parents of your baby before the birth. David, we could go to the next slide. So we talked a little bit already about the role of your surrogacy agency, but my view is that the surrogacy agency should know everything that's going on at all times, from the moment that you have your initial consultation and decide to hire a surrogacy agency, through the birth of your baby and you obtaining a passport and getting home safely to your home country. That includes knowing what's happening at the medical clinic, what the appointments are. That includes knowing where the surrogate is getting monitored for her medical treatment. It includes everything about legal matters. So let's go through these points briefly. Matching with a screened, well-supported, and amazing surrogate. Yes, we talked about that. The screening has to be really rigorous and thorough so that we know that the stage is set for a very sound, safe surrogacy journey. And surrogates should have support. Intended parents should have support, and surrogates should have support. So, for example, in my agency, you would have a case manager. You'd always have me. I would be supervising and watching legal matters be getting done. And your surrogate would have a support person, someone who's keeping in touch with her on a consistent, regular basis, at least every week, and usually more than that. Support, support, support. That's what people need when they go through a surrogacy process. Going to the next one, matching you with a carefully screened egg donor. So again, my experience is that you'll get the egg donor somewhere outside of my agency, but with my support and guidance. If you need resources to find an egg donor, I can give you those. If you need coordination help to lock in an egg donor, I can give you that. But the egg donor will come either from the clinic or an egg donation agency. Insurance support. Insurance, very, very important issue when it comes to surrogacy. There are a few different insurances you need to know about. Medical insurance for the surrogate is very important. We need to make sure her medical bills will be covered by insurance. The surrogacy agency should be guiding the surrogate and the parents to make sure that the surrogate has medical insurance. Sometimes she has it, sometimes we need to get it, and that will be part of what you would learn during the matching process. Then there's newborn insurance, and this is so crucial, especially for international parents where you're not used to the system of insurance here in the US, but you need to have private medical insurance to cover your baby here in the United States. And there are a couple of places where you can get that. And again, your agency should be able to help you find those resources, connect you with those resources, give you information about where you might be able to get this type of insurance, and monitor it so that we know that you have it and you know that you have it. Some offer legal guidance and escrow management. We do that. If you like an agency that doesn't do that, that doesn't have a lawyer on board, there are extremely competent surrogacy lawyers that can be employed. In addition to hiring your surrogacy agency, there are also escrow management services. But those pieces need to be put in place, and your surrogacy agency will be helping you and making sure that those pieces are put in place for you. So you should never be in a position where they say, oh, now you need a lawyer in Illinois and go find one. Your agency should be connecting you with the lawyers. Now you need a escrow management agency. You should never be left on your own to have to find those resources. Your surrogacy agency should be guiding you and providing you with these resources. Coordination with medical providers, so crucial. I like to think that we and the medical team become one team, one group of professionals to help you and your surrogate to bring a baby into the world. And lastly and importantly, to let you know that everything is set at the hospital, that you have a pre-birth order of parentage, the hospital knows it, you have it, the surrogate has it, there are no questions at the hospital, you're the parents or the parent, and then you get your passport, and we give you some information and guidance about obtaining your passport, and your lawyers will be working with your home country lawyer to make sure you have everything you need to be able to bring your baby back to your home country and be the legal parents of your baby there, which is another complicated world of legal matters, but very, very doable. And we address them all the time with our international parents. So thank you very much. I'm glad to be here for you, and I'll be happy to answer questions later.
Thank you so much, Vicki. Okay, before I hand it over to Dr. Alvarez, I should have mentioned that, again, we're going over a lot of information very, very quickly. I understand if your head is spinning. Again, we have a lot more resources about everything Vicki just talked about on our website, gayswithkids.com. But you can also ask your questions as they're occurring to you using the Q&A function of your Zoom screen, or if you're joining us on Facebook Live, you can put them in the comments there. I'll be collecting them throughout this presentation, and then we'll just go through them as many as we can at the end. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Alvarez.
Hello, everybody. Thank you again, Gays with Kids, for having me. My name is Dr. Juan Alvarez. I'm a reproductive endocrinology and infertility specialist in Chicago. I work at Fertility Centers of Illinois. First of all, I wanted to start this with just talking a little bit about what is the role of the IVF clinic. What I like to think of the IVF clinic is more like the base or hub. So we are in constant communication with the surrogacy agencies, and as the physician and as a doctor, I am the one who is providing information, medical information, as well as guidance as for the egg donor, the surrogate, and embryo transfer. So in the IVF clinic, what we're really doing is we're creating the embryos and we're doing the embryo transfers. We're making sure that your donor is going to be sound and a good donor, meaning that it's going to be successful. We also evaluate the surrogate to make sure that they are also medically cleared to be able to carry a pregnancy, and that's going to be as successful as possible. Now, the first step when seeing a doctor in the IVF clinic is basically just to get medical history, surgical history, medications, and screening and trying to figure out if there could be any possible infertility diagnosis. The first step for two men who are trying to have a baby would be to start off with the sperm analysis. We want to do all the pre-screening evaluation that we need to do. And so our clinic coordinates with the intended parents at their home country to be able to do a semen analysis and basic lab work in their country. So this is the pre-screening sort of evaluation. Once we know that there isn't any problems, such as infectious diseases or any problems with the sperm analysis, then the second role of the IVF clinic is to provide more of a guidance to how we're going to be freezing sperm, how we're going to be transferring the sperm, how we're going to be creating embryos. So the IVF clinic, the role for the IVF clinic is getting the egg donor. Now, a lot of IVF clinics do have their own egg donor program, like Fertility Centers of Illinois, we have our own egg donor program, but we also work with either egg donor agencies, but definitely working close with the surrogacy agency. So we do all of the pre-screening for all of the egg donors, the pre-screening for all of the surrogates. And so that is really the role of the IVF clinic and the doctor. How successful are you going to be with this endeavor? And we want to make sure that you are going to be as successful as possible. We all want everybody to get pregnant on their first try. And so the pre-screening process is very important in the IVF clinic. We also discuss whose sperm we're going to use, what sperm source we're going to use. Are we going to use the one intended parent, both of the parents? Are we going to be doing genetic testing? We discuss the pros and the cons of that. We also discuss the pros on transferring one embryo versus two embryos. So really, the IVF clinic is the center for guiding intended parents through the medical process. And then also coordinating with the surrogacy agency to make sure that the surrogate is going to be a good candidate. Next slide. So what is the process? The first step would be to make a first visit appointment to see one of the fertility doctors. And what I usually recommend for, especially for LGBT parents, is to find a place like David had said, that you know that we dedicate our time and effort to the LGBT community. I am lucky that my clinic is very supportive, and we've been helping LGBTQ couples for over 20 years, creating many LGBTQ families. So I'm very proud of that. I myself am also a gay man, and so going into REI when helping LGBTQ couples is one of my biggest passions. So we always want to try to make the process as simple as possible, because there are a lot of different components, IVF clinic, egg donation, surrogate. And so going to an experienced clinic is going to be very important. Now, at Fertility Centers of Illinois, we also have our own separate division that is only dedicated to egg donation, sperm donation, and surrogacy. So we take all the guesswork out of the process, because we have dedicated nursing team that actually communicates both with the intended parents, with the surrogacy agency, and possibly with the egg donor agencies to coordinate everything to make sure that everything has been either approved or that everything is going well. Okay. Now, we offer online appointments. Now with the pandemic, we've really have seen that Zoom consultations and telemedicine is really working. And so first consultation would be through online. Then our team will get a hold of the intended parents to start the whole process of doing the first initial analysis. So the sperm freezing, and FDA sperm freeze, which is very important. In the United States, our lab is certified by CLIA and also by the FDA. And so we have to make sure that when we do any testing, it has to be done in a lab that is FDA approved. And this is very important, because then if they're not, your embryos will not be eligible to be transferred to a surrogate. So that's very important. We send an international kit to the intended parents after all the pre-screening, so that they are able to do their sperm freezing, FDA labs, physical, all at the same time, so that their sperm can be transferred to our office and to our clinic. Once we have the frozen sperm, then that's pretty much what we need from the intended parents. Also, the IVF clinic is going to be in the process of helping you select your egg donor so that we can create embryos. We usually like to use young women, and so that is also another part of the counseling process. Are we going to be using frozen eggs? Are we going to be using fresh eggs? Are we going to be using anonymous eggs? And so really the fertility doctor, the role for the fertility doctor is to help and guide intended parents to be as successful as possible, and then also working with the nursing team, the surrogacy team, to be able to coordinate everything, because we want to make sure that everyone's going to be successful. Once the embryos are created in our laboratory, then as a physician, I evaluate and make sure that the surrogate is going to be a good candidate. So we review medical records, past OB history. If there were any complications, did the patient have any fertility problems? So really getting into trying to weed out possible candidates that would not be as successful as other candidates. Hello?
Sorry.
I'm so sorry. Did it mute and then unmute?
I think
or was I?
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I'm good. Okay, great. So if you guys have any questions or anything for me, like David said, we're offering free 30-minute consultations so that I can more specifically answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, Rich, you're up for the legal portion.
All right, thanks, David. And it's really great to be here with Juan and Vicky, two very just highly experienced experts in this field, and great to be on a webinar for gay parents presented by gay people. It's just, for the people, we are the people. All right, so let's talk about the case for pursuing surrogacy in the United States. I think it's important for you to understand that surrogacy is not regulated in most countries. It's not allowed in most countries. In many places, it's actually illegal. There are some exceptions around the world for altruistic surrogacy. I think it says traditional here, but altruistic surrogacy is allowed in some places, and that's where the surrogate isn't paid. But in most places, commercial surrogacy, where you pay a surrogate for her time and her effort, that is not allowed. With some exceptions. But the US is really widely considered to be the best place in the world for surrogacy for intended parents, because it's been around for many years, 30, 40 years, I think was described earlier. So we have legal support here, we have societal support here, and certainly great medical success here as well. So you have a great solid foundation for surrogacy in the US. And there are many reputable agencies and clinics in the US that have multiple years of experience in servicing gay men and helping them become dads through surrogacy. Now, even though surrogacy is well supported and it's safe in the US, you will need to connect with a lawyer in your home country. This is super important for you. I'm going to repeat this several times. You'll see it on each of the slides, actually. It's super important for you and your US lawyer to know up front what issues you might have to be dealing with when you go home with the baby. We need to know that up front as we plan your case from the very beginning, and you need to be thinking about it as well from the very beginning. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, David. So let's talk about some of those legal considerations. It's important to understand that surrogacy law in the US, it's not federal. It is state by state. There is no federal law regarding surrogacy in the US. So it is state by state, and the law, surrogacy law, can be established by court rulings or case law. It can be established by statute, or it can be sometimes in some states we have both, and in some states we have neither. Sometimes it's just evolved and it's allowed because it's not prohibited, and it's evolved and developed based on custom and practice with what the lawyers and the judges in that state have worked out over time. So it's important to know that even in the US, although it is safe, it is constantly evolving and constantly changing, and it's important to get a current consultation with a lawyer in a relevant state before you assume anything you might find on the internet. And now that said, most states in the US do permit surrogacy. There are a couple of exceptions. In Louisiana, only altruistic surrogacy is allowed, and in Michigan, the state of Michigan, it's not allowed at all. And there are some some states with a lot of restrictions that make it basically impractical to consider those states. But the vast majority of the states in the US do permit surrogacy. Now, in surrogacy cases, one of our ultimate goals is to make sure that you are the legal parents. So the approaches to what we call parental rights, or establishing parental rights, or parentage, it's all the same thing. They do vary from state to state, but generally we go to court and we get a court order. There are a couple of states where there is an administrative procedure, but as same-sex couples, gay men in particular, we want you to have a court order. If you're from another country, it's also important that you have a court order. That way you have something that could be given full faith and credit, or at least recognized in another jurisdiction if your rights came into question. So how and when the court orders are obtained and how they're worded will vary, and frequently the court procedures as well will vary, even within a state, from county to county. So again, it's very important to get a consultation from a lawyer in the relevant state where you'll be working. I'll get into this a bit more in the next slide. Now, as I mentioned before, it's important to know upfront what your needs are in your home country in terms of looking at the paperwork, especially the court judgment and the birth certificate, before you start looking at surrogates in various states in the US, because the state laws vary. They vary in terms of what's allowed. They vary in terms of who is allowed to become a legal parent. Some states require that intended parent couples be married. Some states require a genetic connection to the child. Some do not require a genetic connection. And some states have differences in how birth certificates can be prepared. Now, I've mentioned that twice, so I'd like to just sort of say, as a side note, the reason why I keep mentioning that is there are certain countries where when you go home, if you go home with a birth certificate with just one father or two fathers, that might not get you anywhere in your home country. You may end up needing a birth certificate that looks normal, that might have to initially list the surrogate on the birth certificate so that you can get back home and register the child. So you need to find out early on whether the state that you're considering your surrogate in will allow you to do that. So again, it's important to know at the beginning what you need to deal with when you go home. All right, so let's move on to the next slide, David. Okay, so as I mentioned, the ultimate legal objective in these cases is to make sure that intended parents are deemed the legal parents and that the birth certificate is prepared correctly. And if applicable, prepared in a way that's going to meet the requirements of the home country. So to have you declared as legal parents, we go through the legal process that's outlined below. You see the little balloons at the bottom of the slide. And we generally follow the law of the state where the baby is born. That law becomes relevant to a lot of the paperwork, the surrogacy agreement, the egg donation agreement, depending on where the donor is, but mostly it's related to the surrogate. Now, there are some exceptions where we might also be able to or want to use the law of the state where the medical procedures occur. There are 3 states in the US that allow us to go to court in the state where the medical procedures occurred, and in some of those situations, we can then use that jurisdiction with favorable law and get a court order there and have it applied or honored in the state where the birth occurred. If the procedure in that state where the birth occurred is too difficult, too onerous, too expensive, too timely, or wouldn't allow you a court order. So for instance, if your surrogate's in a state where marriage is required for the intended parents, but your clinic was in a state that didn't require marriage, you could potentially get a court order in the state where the clinic is located and then have that honored in the birth state. Now, that's not universally true. It's something you have to check in every single case by case, to make sure that that would be honored, that the court order from another state would be honored in the birth state. I've digressed a little bit, so let me get back to sort of the slides. Again, connecting with a lawyer in your home country is super important so that you know up front what issues you have to be dealing with when you go home with the baby. You don't want your US lawyer to do anything accidentally in your US paperwork that would hinder what you need to do when you go home. So what legal paperwork are we talking about? You typically will need a contract with your egg donor, and you'll need a contract with your surrogate. The focus of this presentation is surrogacy, so I'll skip over the egg donor agreement for the moment. And if we have questions about it, afterward, I can handle those. So the surrogacy agreement is the first step in the legal paperwork process. It's a step that you only start after your surrogate is medically cleared, and the contract must be completed before your surrogate can begin her injectable medications to get ready for the embryo transfer. The contract process can generally take, just a few weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. It can depend on the situation, depends on the lawyers you're using, but it's usually a fairly quick process. It's also usually not a very highly contentious process. These are fairly standard documents where everybody's rights and obligations are spelled out. All the fees and expenses are spelled out, and we basically want to indicate in the surrogacy agreement, the main point of it is to indicate that you are the intended parents and that your surrogate is not intending to be a parent, and that she will cooperate with you and do and sign whatever we need her to do and sign to make sure that you become the legal parents. So the next step in the process, and this can vary depending on the law firm or lawyers that you're using, would be guardianship documentation. Now, it's super important for you as parents to be thinking about things we don't want to think about sometimes, which is what happens if we die. Okay, you need to be thinking about the child and who would care for the child in the event that you die during this process. So it's important to really establish who you want as your backup guardians during the surrogacy. That way, if the worst thing does happen, it's very clear who will take care of the child. Now, the other thing that we do, some lawyers do this, some don't, is we also want the surrogate to grant you a healthcare power of attorney so that you have some sort of standing with the obstetrician. The obstetrician, the main pregnancy doctor, will be viewing the surrogate as the patient. The OB, the obstetrician, will know that you are the parents. They know that this is your baby, but their patient is the surrogate, and they can't share her private medical information without her permission. And we might address this should be addressed in the contract, but the doctor is not bound by the contract. So a separate healthcare power of attorney or HIPAA release of some kind to give you access to talk to the doctor, to possibly view medical records if you need to see them, or to be present at any of the healthcare visits, including at the hospital, and whether you're present, in person or by Zoom or by FaceTime, those are important rights that you'd like to have during the pregnancy. So that's the guardianship and healthcare power of attorney phase of the paperwork. Now, the parental establishment phase is the last phase. It's the longest phase, probably the most important phase of the legal work. And it's something that generally gets started after the first trimester of the pregnancy has been completed. So around 14 weeks. Now, that can vary a little bit from law firm to law firm, but usually you start getting ready for court in the second trimester. Now, in this process, we basically will gather information from all of the parties and use that information to draft court documents to explain to the court that this is a surrogacy case, that the normal presumption that the woman who is pregnant is the mother does not apply here. She's not the mother. You guys have a surrogacy agreement with her, and she does not want to be the parents, and you do. So we explain to the court all of these facts. Everybody signs off on these facts and lets the court know this is a fully agreed petition, and that the court order that we're asking the court to sign is a fully agreed court order. And so when the court gets these agreed petitions, many courts around the country do not require hearings for these cases. This can vary, though. There are some states that do require hearings. So your attorney will help you get prepared for what you need to know and what you need to do in this process. But generally, the court order can either be signed pre-birth or post-birth. Now, there are some states that have a process that's entirely pre-birth, where we actually file the court case and get the court order prior to the birth. And there are other states that don't even allow us into court until the birth has occurred. And these are what we call post-birth procedures. And there are some states that actually have a hybrid, where you have a pre-birth phase of the court process and a post-birth order that's required as well. So again, this can vary from state to state. If you're in a pre-birth state, what we typically see is the pre-birth order will be signed by about 24 to 28 weeks of the pregnancy. And in these states, these pre-birth orders are not effective until the baby is born. But we will still provide a copy of that court order to the hospital so they know in advance that there's a surrogacy birth coming up, that you're the intended parents. And if they have any questions, the hospital can ask those questions. If they need documents, we can get extra documents to them so that when the birth occurs, everything has been worked out. There really shouldn't be any questions. It should all go very smooth and be a very happy occasion. If you're in a state where it's a post-birth court process only, we would still have a conversation with the hospital at around 24 to 28 weeks, basically the beginning of the third trimester, and explain everything to the hospital. The only thing that's different is we don't have the court order at that moment. We'll have it later. So we tell them, hey, hold off on any of your paperwork until we get you the final post-birth order. So that's the court process in very, very short summary. After the birth occurs, well, when the birth occurs, there will be some paperwork to complete for the birth certificate. Generally, the birth certificate will not be printed until the final court order is available. So if it's a pre-birth order, that's done. If it's a post-birth order, you may need to wait a little bit for that. But for international intended parents, we do expedite the birth certificates as much as possible. On average, we see that they're usually available within about 2 weeks of birth. And that's important because normally they'll take 2 to 3 months and they just get mailed, but that's not appropriate for international intended parents. You need the birth certificate quickly because you also need a US passport for the child. The child is automatically a US citizen, so the child is entitled to a US passport, and that process of getting the passport can take another 3 to 5 days. As long as we're not in COVID times, then it should be fairly quick, and then you can leave and go home usually within about 3 to 4 weeks. Again, that timeline can vary from state to state. The other thing that you might need to consider, depending on which country you're coming from, is whether you need to visit your home country consulate while you're here. You may need to register the birth of the child at your home country consulate. You might need to obtain travel documents if you're coming from China, for instance. So again, this is where your home country attorney comes in. They can tell you exactly what you need to do while you're still here in the US. If we're in any kind of COVID situation where there are travel bans, they can be navigated. Everybody can get here to the US for the birth of their baby. You don't need to panic about that. It just requires some advanced planning, and we would recommend starting to plan that about 3 months before the birth. But hopefully that won't be an issue for too much longer, but it's still an issue at the moment. So I think that's it for me, David.
Great, thank you so much to all of our panelists. So just quickly before we get through the Q&A, so again, what's next? If your head is spinning again, we do not blame you. To have each of these experts distill what they do down to 10 minutes really is a feat. So I thank them for attempting to do it. You of course have questions, and again, if you haven't asked them yet, feel free to use the Q&A function of Zoom or in the comments of YouTube. We're going to get through as many of these as possible. But so again, the next steps, you are doing what you're doing. You're on this webinar, you're doing your research, continue to do that. There are tons of amazing resources on gayswithkids.com that we're rolling out each and every day. And each of the websites of our partners here too have great detailed information. Make sure to visit them. But truly the best next step from this is to sign up for a free consult with one or all of our partners to get all of your very detailed questions for your particular country, your particular set of circumstances answered. Our partners are happy to do it, and they're happy to do it for free. We're very excited to be able to offer this service now. And then again, just our website, gayswithkids.com. We have a whole webinar series that will walk you through every step of this process, not just the international part. Basically, each of the areas of expertise you just heard from, we will get into in a lot more detail in other webinars and just on other videos and articles that we have on our website. All right, so I'm going to take us off the screen share so we can see each other. And we're going to get into as many of these questions as we can. Again, if we do not get to your question or if we can't answer it fully, email us at dads@gayswithkids.com. You're also welcome to chat us privately if you prefer to do that. So the first question we got was about whether we will be recording and sharing this, and that is yes, we are. This will be uploaded to our website. It will be added to all the other great ones that we've done. And this one's actually great because we've done several international webinars that have been specific to countries. This has been the first one we've done that's more generic like this. And I think it's actually, most of this information is applicable to you no matter where you are. But if you have a specific country specific question, feel free to ask it now and we'll do our best to answer it. So I'm actually going to start with one that you all touched on briefly in what you talked about. But that someone is still wondering if you can talk about just what they need to be thinking about. Let's say they're ready to get going now, they're ready to sign up. So how is COVID continuing to impact each of your areas of expertise, and what do people need to be thinking about that are outside of the US that might be in a country that's still locked down, et cetera? But let's say, Rich, you touched on this, but let's just, if you can expand on anything that people need to be thinking about from a legal perspective.
Well, from a legal perspective, COVID has impacted the surrogacy and egg donation contracts to a degree because we want to talk about vaccinations. You need to be making sure that that's part of your initial conversation prior to matching. with a surrogate in particular, because if you want her to be vaccinated and she doesn't want to get vaccinated, that's not a good match. So it's something you discuss early on in the match. And then in terms of contracts, we address, that everybody agrees to follow the health guidelines and the doctor's recommendations regarding how to minimize or avoid exposure as best as possible. And then there are timelines that get affected. With COVID, travel hasn't always been as easy to come by, and there are delays that could be impacted. And also the trip that the surrogate might need to make or the donor might need to make to the clinic could be longer than planned if she needs to stay in one spot for longer and quarantine, for instance. So that can impact expenses as well. As far as the back end, it's really more about the travel planning for the parents, making sure that they've allowed enough time to plan on getting approvals to enter the country despite the travel bans. And that shouldn't be an issue. All intended parents that are coming here for the birth of their child should be granted a humanitarian national interest exception to enter the US if they're coming from a country that is subject to the travel bans imposed by the presidential proclamations in place at the moment.
Great. Vicki, how about from the agency side? Anything additionally that people need to be thinking about?
I think Richard really covered it very well. I would just say in the beginning stages in terms of doing the semen analysis, and I think Dr. Alvarez could speak to this possibly to be able to deposit samples in their home country. But I think they need to check with Dr. Alvarez first to make sure that there's coordination with the clinic where they might be doing the semen analysis, and then to be able to have it shipped to the United States. And yes, the obvious travel concerns, and to plan so that if people or when people are expecting their baby, not to wait till the last minute to get their exceptions to be able to travel to do what's necessary. We have letters from congressmen that will help them in the consulates to be able to get these exceptions, but just to plan it in enough time so it's not an anxiety producing issue.
And how about from the clinic side, Dr. Alvarez?
So from the clinic side, for the intended parents, not a huge difference from the pandemic since we do everything virtual. And now we're doing virtual visits with our own patients here in the US as well. I would say for the sperm freeze, be adding a COVID test, make sure that it's negative. If the intended parents do want to come in either for the embryo transfer or any of the OB ultrasounds, if they want to be in person, they have to be either vaccinated or have a negative COVID test. So those are really the only differences for the intended parents. Now for the egg donors, like Richard had touched on, for the donors and for the surrogates, there might be a little bit more delay as well, especially if they do have to travel. Right now, we're trying to have the donors and the surrogate in the same place. But it doesn't mean that we can't use a donor or a surrogate from another city or another state. It just takes a little bit longer doing COVID tests and repeat COVID tests that might add a little bit more to the timeline as well.
What a world of difference from a year ago. I was actually the very first webinar Gays with Kids did was because of the pandemic. We got everyone online, experts from everywhere, to talk about how this is impacting all the different processes that are available to gay men. I just have to say, I mean, all of these experts and all of the partners that we work with, it's incredibly impressive that even in the height of the pandemic, they were managing to make surrogacy arrangements happen. They were getting people in this country for the birth. So if it could happen a year ago, it can definitely happen now. And again, it's very impressive that that was able to happen even under those very unprecedented circumstances. So this next question also is a great one, and we have a whole webinar on this too. But so we get this pretty much every webinar we do, but people want to know, as a single parent, first of all, can they do it? And then, but for us, let's dig into what it means, if anything, in terms of the process and how it differs for a single gay, bi, or trans man that's interested in doing this. And why don't we start with you, Dr. Alvarez?
Yes. So for a single dad or a trans man, it's not different. We still create the embryos with one sperm source instead of two sperm sources, and so the process is very similar than if there were a couple.
Great. From the agency side, Vicki?
I'm sorry, tell me that question again.
It was for single parents. If it's
single parents, right. So for us, it's very much the same. And the only thing that sometimes we do, because it's so expensive in the United States, that sometimes we'll try to work with people on fees because they're coming to it with one source of funds rather than two. And that can be, obviously, it is the best place to do surrogacy in the United States, except for the cost. And that's the daunting thing for people. So, and there are resources to try to get grants and things like that. So I think it's important for people to get information where they can to help them out. And support, family support is crucial. I've had single parents come with a parent or a sister or a friend. So I think just having support, doesn't have to be a partner or a spouse, but having that support is good.
I think you read the mind of our attendees. Cost is going to be the next question, but let's quickly go over legal aspects for anyone that's considering doing this single.
So as a single parent, it's even more important that you think about who your backup guardians are going to be. You know, sometimes we'll find that couples might not want to assign a guardian, or they think it's never going to happen to them, and there's two of them, you know, so the chances of both of them passing are probably a lot fewer. So much more important for a single parent to establish a backup guardian. And then the rest is really very consistent with what Vicki just said. It takes some more planning and support. We find that a lot of our single parents need us a little bit more. They rely on us. They lean on us more because they don't have another person to share some of the legal work to do that needs to be done. And I think because they're moving forward as a single person, planning things out in advance will be even sooner, provides some sense of calm. So.
From your perspective, if you're on this as a single person, thinking you're the only person in the world that's doing this or thinking about doing this, you can ask anyone on this Zoom. There are tons and tons, increasingly every year, people are tackling this as single people, and it's a beautiful thing. The journey can be more complicated in some ways, but I think the great thing that I'm hearing anyway is that it's not so much any of these areas of expertise that make it more challenging, but it is just, figuring out your support system, your community, and again, I'm moving forward in that way. And again, we have a whole webinar on this, so go check that out if you have not yet. But so let's talk about costs. So because costs are something people need to be considering from outside the US. It's already incredibly expensive in the US. So maybe if you could just, in your answers here, break down a little bit about the costs for each of your areas of expertise and how it differs for international parents, if at all. Let's keep it with you, Rich. Perfect.
So who did you want to state?
Oh, sorry, with Rich. Why don't we start with
Rich? Yeah.
So on the legal side, considering that you will have to cover the attorney's fees for the egg donor and for the surrogate, there are also court costs, etc. What you can find is the legal fees can range anywhere from 10 to 20,000 US total. That includes court costs, surrogate attorney, donor attorney, and intended parent attorney. And that includes birth certificates, it includes apostilles, extra copies of your judgments, all of those things. Now, for international clients, it's included within that range of 10 to 20, but what you can often see is there's a surcharge for international parents because there's a bit more work to do coordinating with the local attorney, the home country attorney, and dealing with more post-birth paperwork. So that's a common thing to see.
Okay, great. Vicki, from the agency side.
So the surrogacy side, there are several different categories that go into this. One would be, and the biggest thing would be the surrogate compensation. And then there would be the agency fee, and then the legal fees, what Rich talked about, and then the insurance, if needed. So those things have to be attended to. And I think on the surrogacy side, people have to be thinking of about $100,000, maybe even 100 to 125,000, depending on insurance. And I'm excluding from that the egg donor, the medical clinic, and the legal fees, which Rich talked about them.
Great. And from the clinic side, Dr. Alvarez.
Yes. So from the clinic side, it would be the fees for the doctor's visits, the egg donor, stimulation for the egg donor, egg extraction, creating of the embryos, storing of the embryos, and then the transfer of the embryos to the surrogate. And so this can be anywhere between $20,000 to $50,000, depending if you're using a fresh donor, a frozen donor, a known donor. So that's pretty much the range, but it's all for the clinic fees of creating and storing and transferring of the embryo.
Great. And we should say, with around the cost, again, this is, no one's denying this is a ton of money. There are ways to offset the costs. You can spread out your journey over the course of, this isn't one upfront fee, right? So these are going to be spread out over the course of your journey. There are grants and loans available. increasingly, we're telling people to go talk to their HR department because more and more businesses and organizations are understanding that this is an important family planning option for queer men, and they're offering some sort of benefits. But it's going to be expensive no matter what you do. But there are, people often see the price of surrogacy and get immediately discouraged. But plenty of people that are not millionaires do this every day, and so can you. And again, go check out some of our other webinars and resources around cost specifically. So we have someone that wants to know specifically about, and I assume this is going to be more of like in a post-COVID era, but do surrogates often go travel and stay with the intended parents in their country, or do they spend good chunks of time? And is that even advisable? Vicki, why don't we have you answer that one?
Right. So no, not usually. I mean, there's a couple of things that work here. One is the relationship between the surrogate and the parents, and that can be an amazing relationship. People do get very friendly and close and become like family if that's what the parents would like, if they want to pursue that kind of a relationship. But basically, when the surrogate is here and pregnant, we would prefer that she stay in the United States. And there'd probably be something in the contract that would say she needs to stay in the United States, and even toward the end of the pregnancy in the state where she lives. But I've had surrogates who have given birth, who have visited the family that they've had a baby for. So they actually have time in the home country and get to know each other even better that way.
Great. Anything you would add, Rich or Dr. Alvarez?
Well, yeah, I would certainly add that in the surrogacy agreements, it's pretty standard to see a clause that says that she will stay in the U.S. during the entire pregnancy, that she would not leave the continental U.S. at all. And part of the reason for that, from a legal point of view, is that surrogacy is illegal in most other countries. You want to really avoid the situation where she might accidentally give birth or need medical care in some other country where she's not covered by insurance or the laws don't protect the situation. So that would be highly inadvisable to have her travel during the surrogacy.
Pretty good reason.
Yeah.
Dr. Alvarez, anything else you'd add?
Yeah, and clinically as well, the surrogate has her insurance here in the United States. If there's any medical problems or any complications, that she'll be here. And I would say the majority, if not all, of surrogates do stay in the United States, and especially in their home state, because of the laws. And so you don't really want a surrogate to go somewhere else, and for some reason she has to end up in the hospital, and then things can go wrong. So yeah, we definitely don't have surrogates traveling.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add that this isn't obviously like a vacation for surrogates. Most of them are holding down other jobs with their children. They have their own lives here. So, I think everyone is hinting at relationships. These are often lifelong relationships that you'll continue after the fact, and plenty of opportunities to interact with her and her family after the birth. But yeah, so this is, I think, helpful to know the reasons why they're not advised to be traveling during this time. So in the last 3 minutes that we have, I just want to give each of our panelists a time to kind of sign off. And if you could leave everyone just with like the one big piece of advice you would give to someone that's outside of this country considering taking this on here in the United States, what would that be? And why don't we start with you, Rich?
I would say do your due diligence. Think very carefully about this process. It's really easy to get super excited about building your family and going through surrogacy, but I think intended parents are in a vulnerable position. We need the help of a surrogate and an agency and a clinic, and do your research and make sure you're picking your team very carefully and not jumping too fast. We all want to be parents yesterday once we decide we want to do this, but take your time because it's worth it. If there is a small delay, in a surrogacy or an egg donation or picking an agency or whatever, it's 2 or 3 months or 4 months. In the grand scheme of a child's lifetime, that's nothing. So take your time and do it right and stay calm.
Great advice. How about you, Vicki?
Yeah, I love the advice that Rich just gave. Taking your time and interviewing professionals and doing research and organizing the plan for the journey. And give yourself time. If you want to have a baby in 3 years, don't wait 2 years and then say, now I want to have a baby in a year. Actually start now. I mean, that whole thing of staggering the cost, people make their embryos first. They take on the medical clinic piece, they get an egg donor, they break it down, and then they have their embryos tucked away, ready to go. And then maybe they engage a surrogacy agency. The soonest you can do things to have a baby is about 1.5 years if things go well with a pregnancy. Things don't always go well. So let's say give yourself 2 to 3 years to have your baby if you can, and that way you break down the cost and you also enjoy the process. I mean, we as professionals want you to enjoy this process of having your baby. And so the more that you can give yourself the luxury of time, the better off you'll be.
Also great advice. I think people are constantly shocked at how long this process is. So it's never too early to at least begin. And you're doing the right thing by doing your research now. Dr. Alvarez.
I totally agree with Richard and Victoria. It really is do your research, especially finding the IVF clinic and surrogacy agency and your lawyer. We all have to be well versed in what's going on. The other thing that I do agree that it is a long process, but I would say not just because it's a long process, everything legal and everything, but medically, a lot of people don't understand that it may not work the first time. And then the disappointment of an embryo transfer and then not working, it happens. And so everybody should be prepared that everybody's here to help. Everybody's here. We all want a success, but it may take some time.
Great. I can't thank our panelists enough. Again, I've just put in the chat links where you can sign up for 30-minute consults. So if we didn't get to your question, they'll be more than happy to answer them there. We do encourage you to meet with multiple or all of our experts. Again, I can't recommend the people that we've chosen to work with and bring you this information enough. You have a ton of resources out there. We're very neutral in this world because we just care about you having a baby and then sharing your photos so we can put them on Instagram. But there is really a smaller group of people that are committed to the LGBTQ community. Like Rich said, it really is so thrilling to be able to do this with 3 other queer people and to be presenting this to other queer people. So please do sign up for those consults, get more of your questions answered, continue to do your research, go to gayswithkids.com, check out our other webinars. We're going to be doing them weekly on the subject of surrogacy throughout the course of the summer, and then we'll re-up them again in the fall. If you have any suggestions for us and how we can improve these or anything else you'd like to share with us, again, email us at gayswithkids.com. I can't thank you all enough again, and I'm going to let you go because we're 1 minute over time.
Thank you, David. Thanks, everybody, for coming.